I could only make it one day into the week, Bill, and now it's time to get that rant out. This is the podcast daily. I guess it's a ticked off Tuesday.
I was going to say it's a tirade Tuesday.
It's a tirade Tuesday. Yes, you hit it. That's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. It's a little bit of a broken record, I guess, for me, but I can't shake this feeling that the whole narrative is going to follow Ohio State throughout the whole year, and I think that it's unfair what's happening. And this is what got me. This was in the New York Times, college football's finest outlet.
That's right. And
it was used twice. I don't know. People can have their own opinions. I certainly respect them all. They use this wording twice, which that's what pushed me over the edge, which is it's the most interesting team in college football, and they are the preseason number 2, according, again, to the New York Times, the most respected newspaper in the world.
The Great Lady.
Ohio State's national title or bust team, it's not quite the 2017 Golden State Warriors after adding Kevin Durant, but the expectations for Ryan Day's all-star team are going to be through the roof, and it will be fascinating to see, A, whether the Buckeyes can pull it off, and B, how many yards Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins can go off for in a Chip Kelly offense. It's the all-star team tag that was used multiple times, and that's what rubbed me the wrong way. And maybe, Bill, you'll tell me that I should calm down about it. Doesn't make that big of a deal. I'm reading it, and it's coming across as like an insult, a historical, like, money bag, McDonald's bag, win it all costs, buy up everybody, and including Kevin Durant in that makes me think of it in a negative light as well. It's like a backhanded compliment, insult, pejorative collection of talent, when that's not really the way that Ohio State put this roster together.
Yeah.
So you can talk me down if you think that I'm like, I need to let that part of it go, and maybe I should. That'd be healthy for me.
I guess it just depends on the implication that you or anyone else digesting that little snippet there chooses to take, right? Because I think Ohio State does have an all-star team, right? Like,
yeah,
they have basically everybody back from a top 10 defense last year, the majority of whom are going to get drafted, and they're plopping Caleb Downs on top of that. They have a decent amount back on offense, and they added some nice transfer weapons there too. So I agree. I agree with the premise that Ohio State has the best roster in college football. I think that's right. You and I just did a podcast earlier where we went through all the position groups. They were all in the top 10. A couple of them were number 1. I think that is an accurate assessment of the roster that Ohio State is bringing to the table in 2024. I suppose if it comes from a place of like, this team is wholly desperate and making rash decisions about putting its roster together, that I would quibble with. So I don't know the intent of said quote there, but if that's how you're approaching it, I am with you in disagreeing with that notion. But I very much do believe that Ohio State has an all-star roster heading into this.
Yeah, I mean, I can and probably should give the most charitable view of that I can. They just really love the roster, and there was in the top 25 rankings a point that much of it was built by retaining JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer. Those guys were identified by name, and that was supplemented by those. Obviously, we know the number is 6, but everybody points to Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, and Caleb Downs, and for good reason. If I'm being more cynical about it, it's because an actual all-star team is taking the best player off of every roster and then putting them together.
Sure.
Like, is there no other way that we can put it? Like loaded, supremely talented, gifted, like well-constructed roster. Like all-star teams by default are not the actual team.
That's a fair point. Yes, if we want to get,
but that's why I think that because there's this notion that Ohio State threw out blank checks across the country that's just doesn't match reality.
It doesn't match reality. We've said it before, right? Quinshon Judkins extended that overture to Ohio State, right? It wasn't that Ohio State was pounding the pavement trying to find guys. Maybe they would have, right? They lost Mayan Williams. They kind of only had Travion Henderson coming back. Once they lost Chip Traynham, yeah, they're probably going to want to add a transfer running back. Would it have been Quinshon Judkins? I don't know, but he came to them, right? Caleb Downs, I think, in a weird way, kind of came to them. Of course, everyone in the country would want to add him too. So it is not a situation where Ohio State just blindly threw money everywhere because it's so desperate to win a national. And I keep saying that word mostly because I struggle to find another one. But irrationally, just like recklessly, like there's like this has felt calculated, like well orchestrated, smart. I think about the way that Ohio State has built this roster. Nothing about it to me screams like, or even mildly hints at, to be honest, the level of again desperation that seems to be suggested sometimes by people who talk about the number, whatever that moving target is of a number that Ohio State may or may not have put out for its players this year. Was it like the Nebraska AD said like $23 million or something like that? Like I don't think the number is quite that high.
I don't think they're sharing their checkbook balance with Nebraska either.
They're not. And like the 13 million thing that was out there earlier is like a number that Ryan Day threw out a couple of years ago. We don't know if that's it. It's a tidy sum of money. I'm sure that like every team has to do that now. That's the way of doing business currently. But I do think Ohio State has gone about this in a pretty smart way. Like not in any way that's being suggested here.
Yeah, and I don't want to keep belaboring that point, and it's beating a dead horse. It's not the first time I've talked about it in the last month. And I mentioned it with Ryan Day when he was sitting on my left in this place 2 weeks ago. Like, if he has frustration with that, if he feels like they need to counter that narrative in some way, if it matters to him at all, and I think in the end result it doesn't really make much difference to him, but for covering the team, for being a fan of the team perhaps, if for being on the team, or a guy who made a decision to come back like a Jack Sawyer or JT Tuimoloau, Lathan Ransom, any of them, the notion that they did it just for money, I think, is unfair, for one. And I don't want to keep going blindly down that road either, or over and over. But now I'm wondering, Bill, if that just becomes the accepted narrative for this team, and if their national title pursuit will be framed in that perspective for the entire year. I know it's June and that can change, but like if Quinshon Judkins and Will Howard and Caleb Downs have the year they expect, is that going to be it? Well, Ohio State just bought their way to the title. Like I wonder how much that's going to accompany them once the games actually start.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. It probably will, right? Which will be funny because there are plenty of SEC programs that have done the same, right? Just not legally so. So it didn't get talked about as much as it was happening while it happened, after it happened. And now it's a little, as you said, like the numbers aren't out there, but we know that that's just the kind of table stakes now. You have to give your players money to, not to keep them, but it's just part of the game now. So that's an easy crutch to fall back on, I guess, for anybody who wants to try to undermine Ohio State's potential run to a national championship here. I guess I would just say, like, who cares? Like, it's part of being a sports fan. Like, people try to lob those things at you all the time, especially when your team is playing well. And Ohio State fans, I think, I've dealt with a version of that for years because Ohio State's always more talented than most of its counterparts regionally and in the Big Ten. So I don't know actually if that'll be anything new for Ohio State fans to deal with, to be honest. But even if it is, even if it's frustrating, they're still going to give you the trophy at the end of the year, right? Yeah. So like I think that would be the thing that I fall back on. I would never let that as a fan like take away from my enjoyment of watching my team. And like for the players themselves, like they know the deal, they know why they came back to Ohio State. And yes, there was some money involved in it, but to your point, I don't think that was the leading reason why they did it, or even anything close to that. I believe in the idea that this team, the core of this team came back because of the goals that have not been met over the last few years.
I guess I just find it odd why that's being used so consistently to describe Ohio State when it wasn't like, I don't remember Nick Saban adding Jamison Williams being like, well, there they go again. Alabama's just taking a little shortcut to complete the roster.
Yeah.
Now they've got their all-star wide receiver that they got in the portal. Like Georgia has always used the transfer portal in a similar way to Ohio State. Mm-hmm. So I can get why that's not really been a common tag to them. But if you look even just at this offseason, there's a lot of people that like what Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin have going. That's a team that's been dramatically altered by the transfer portal. Were they not trying to select an all-star team much more than Ohio State was? Like,
yeah,
it doesn't seem to be applied evenly.
It doesn't. I think Ole Miss is a good example. I think Louisville in the ACC that people kind of think is wide open, and you'll see enough people toss up like Louisville as a dark horse. Like I think they had like 23 transfers in this offseason. So yeah, it's probably the logic there is not applied equally across the board for teams that are active in the transfer portal. But then again, like Ohio State, I also think like doesn't even really fit that bill because we're talking about 6 players, not double digits, not upwards of 20 or 23 or whatever it was that Ole Miss and teams like Louisville had. I think like Missouri, people like Missouri is a team that made the playoff this year, but coming off of last year, they had a really good team last year. They've added double digit transfers, right? So Ohio State's, again, we've said it before, like Ohio State's additions are high profile nearly across the board, but in terms of like just sheer numbers, like they're not even close to the most aggressive teams or the teams that have retooled the most via the transfer portal.
Yeah, I can't really understand why that is.
Ohio State gets clicks.
That's true,
I guess, right?
Yeah, but I'm not meaning it to pick on one particular person or outlet. I know that it'll come across that way. I get it. I'm whining. It's a tirade Tuesday, but I just don't want to have to talk about that once the actual football starts, because I just don't think that it applies to this team, for one. And if that becomes some sort of driving force on game day every Saturday, I don't think that Big Noon Kickoff is probably as likely to participate in that discussion because of the divide between the SEC
right.
and
yeah.
They probably won't frame it that way. So maybe that'll alleviate some of it, but game day is still the one that gets the most attention, and there are like just national storylines that take hold that you can't shake. And that's sort of why I feel like I want to push back against it now. And it won't change anyone's mind. These they don't care. The ones that are already saying that,
yeah.
I won't be able to change their opinion, but like I feel like it should have a clean slate. They're a very good team. They were not acquired in any sort of illicit way or by plucking people off of 25 different rosters.
Yeah, well, I bet part of it is too, like Ohio State has a tremendous fan base, probably the largest in the country. A lot of people that want to see Ohio State do very well every year, but also a lot of people who enjoy when Ohio State doesn't do well. That kind of comes with the territory, and it probably serves those people to build Ohio State up as something like this, so that if it comes to Ohio State not winning a national championship, they can pile on a little more, like even if it's not necessarily reality.
Boy, now that's the most skeptical take that we've actually got to here. Oh boy,
yeah. There's good. I mean, I think you and I both have been in media long enough to know that there's good money in both pumping up Ohio State and in criticizing Ohio State, and probably more in the latter, if we're being honest.
Yeah, maybe that's what's going on. I think that's maybe. I hadn't even really thought about that. That's a fantastic point. That's also a good reason, I think, for me to, or us, or the podcast daily, or anybody else around Ohio State to be like, well, wait a minute. Let's be honest about how this happened, because if it's like Ohio State went on an outright spending spree, and if something changes and they fall short, that doesn't that narrative won't work either.
I mean, I don't think we'll be criticizing the team.
No.
Right?
If they want to pile on, say, well, Ryan Day couldn't do this even after he got an unlimited blank check to spend on his roster, which is like not really the case. He did get a lot of money. The collectives did a good job. They've taken care of the rosters, the players who had tough decisions. Like we talked about that throughout the offseason. They could return to school. They spent money.
But haven't they, like, my view on that is, yes, that's true, but then like they've sort of like merely like gotten themselves to an even playing field now, right? They're not
right.
They have become, I think, what you as an Ohio State fan or anyone who's understanding of what Ohio State is and should be, they've sort of just like become that in this new landscape. I don't think they're doing anything like above and beyond themselves, right?
I know. And that's, again, maybe that's too pessimistic of a view, and using the word all-star could be easily replaced with something else, which is why that I think it should be, because I do suspect, I don't know and I can't prove it, that it's being done in a more nefarious way, and it's suggesting that something was done in an underhanded way.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I'm so annoyed by it.
Do you think was Caleb Downs like the tipping point? Like if Ohio State, if Caleb Downs like just decided to stay at Alabama or go to Georgia or whatever, would people be talking about Ohio State in these terms if everything else was the same?
Boy, that's a good question. Probably not.
I don't think so.
Because Quinshon Judkins, the way that happened, and unless I'm mistaken, he had the no contact label in the profile. So I think people could understand that was probably already done, wrapped up, and Quinshon Judkins had that in his mind. So it wasn't like free agent bidding.
Yeah.
His is different. When you look at Will Howard, I think everyone understands that it was NFL, Ryan Day, or Lincoln Riley for college quarterback development if that's the route that he wanted to go. And not necessarily, again, another situation that was open bidding.
And he also wasn't the top transfer quarterback.
It wasn't. Other people did not have him viewed as the number one.
Yeah.
You had Dylan Gabriel situation, Riley Leonard, others that were involved. So I think those two made sense to people. And I was like, those are not splashy salary cap busting signings.
Yeah.
But everyone in the country wanted Caleb Downs, and that's what seems to have shaken people. Even though Ohio State initially finished second in that recruitment,
right,
shouldn't have come as a major surprise that they would be right back involved again.
Yeah, and what if he would gone to Georgia? Was Georgia an all-star team then? I don't know. Or is Georgia just Georgia? Because that's what Georgia does. It's funny. It's funny. I don't think you should get yourself worked up about it. But there is a definite tone with the way that I think a lot of people have talked about Ohio State this offseason that I do believe is missing the target. But I don't know that we can control that.
We can't.
So much.
It's too late. I already said it all.
He's already angry. It's too late.
I gotta find something to get worked up about every once in a while.
Just you gotta keep. You gotta.
And I gotta get it out. And now, I've said my piece. I don't have to talk about it ever again, unless somebody does it worse and in a more direct way than this. Which
there's a lot of time before the season.
I know. I know I'm going to see it again. And the reality is this one might wind up being more innocuous than something else that we'll see as the other magazines come out.
Yeah.
I hope not, because I don't want to do this again, and you don't want to listen to me do it again on the podcast daily. So I promise to you now, I will do my very best to not bring it up again before August 1st and the start of spring camp. But as Bill said, there's still 6.5 weeks to go until then. So
just wait until the season starts and Michigan's 3-3 going into the middle of October. You'll have plenty of things you don't want to hear.
Yeah, I think I can work with that. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. The next bridge though will be camp season back at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center later on today, which is Tuesday, as the Buckeyes get back to recruiting camps. We'll have some coverage of that, of course. We'll have the podcast daily for Wednesday. We'll have some snap judgments and maybe a lot more as the week progresses. We'll see how it goes. For Bill Landis, I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.